Welcome to the Peter King Podcast. Man, as if there wasn't enough to talk about after Sunday of Week 5, Monday night of Week 5. We could do a separate podcast on Monday night, on the game, on the calls in it, on the aftermath with Davante Adams, and we will get to some of that. I mean, we have just a solid block of stuff that's going to be really interesting to discuss with my friend from NBC Sports, Myles Simmons. So we are going to discuss many things in this podcast, including the crazy Monday night game with Josh McDaniels' decision, the Raiders coach, to go for 2 with 4 minutes to go, not make it, and no points were ever scored again in the game. We're going to discuss the New York Giants, who might not be great, but they are legit. We're going to talk about the defending Super Bowl championship teams, or the defending Super Bowl teams, I should say, Cincinnati and the Rams. I mean, it won't be an upset if neither of these teams makes the playoffs. So we're going to discuss a little bit on both of those guys. Matt Rhule fired. I kind of feel like in Carolina it was only a matter of time. And I usually really like Brandon Staley's mindset, the Chargers coach, but I'm not so crazy about what he did on Sunday. Myles paid close attention to that game. We're going to get into that. And we're going to preview the 2 big games of Week 6, Dallas at Philadelphia and Buffalo at Kansas City. So much to discuss, but we're going to start with the tributaries of Tua Tagovailoa and how this league has changed in the last 16 days. Myles, hello. Happy Week 6. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Peter. It is nice to have a good primetime game to discuss after what we saw Monday night between the Raiders and the Chiefs. And I think we're starting in the right place because, look, whatever has happened with Tua Tagovailoa and the investigation and the subsequent revelations that have come out of it, it seems like there is a lot that is going into how the NFL is not just reacting to it, but also officiating these games. And when you're determining outcomes with officiating, I don't think that's necessarily what anybody really wants.
Yeah, let me just sort of set the stage for this a little bit. I was watching the games on Sunday, and when I saw what happened with Teddy Bridgewater, for those who did not see it, Teddy Bridgewater was hit hard on a tackle/sack attempt by Sauce Gardner on the first Miami play of the game. Bridgewater went down. He stayed down for a moment and got up and walked back as if to get in the huddle. But it ended up being a safety, so he had to leave the field and they had to punt, blah, blah, blah. So at that time, they decided to check Teddy Bridgewater for concussion symptoms in the locker room. So he walked into the locker room. He was cleared by the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant of any, this according to the Dolphins, he was cleared of any symptoms. And so he came out after that. But the spotter upstairs, in every NFL game, there is a spotter who is supposed to look down and say, hey, listen, you better check this guy out because it looks like he was a little wobbly, or he looks this, he looks that. He has the power to basically say, take that guy out of the game or check him out, whatever. And that spotter claims to have seen Teddy Bridgewater unstable in some ways, and he ruled him out for the rest of the game. Saturday afternoon, that is what the NFL and the NFLPA decided. And they decided, in essence, together, that if any player shows what the league and the union described as ataxia, which is basically gross motor instability, or any sign that you're wobbly, punch drunk, whatever you would call it, then you're gone for the game. Great decision by the league and the union. However, on Teddy Bridgewater, no one saw any of this gross motor instability, except apparently the spotter upstairs. And we're going to get to why this is significant, but what bothers me is when Channel 7 in Miami on Monday afternoon released its footage of Teddy Bridgewater from the moment he got driven into the turf by Sauce Gardner. I think they had about 1:15 of footage of Teddy Bridgewater, and you never saw any gross motor instability. You didn't see anything of any player having to help him get up or keep him steady. So we never saw what apparently the spotter upstairs saw. That presents a gigantic problem. The Miami Dolphins lost this football game in part, because Tua Tagovailoa and Teddy Bridgewater didn't play, and a third-string quarterback, Skylar Thompson, who had never played in an NFL game before, came in. And look, he's a third-string quarterback who's gotten 0 reps probably with the ones all year, all through training camp. And so he has to come in, and he said, oh, yeah, let's form chemistry right in 10 minutes with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And obviously, the Miami offense really sputtered. They lose the game. And look, if Teddy Bridgewater demonstrated this, he should be out of the game. I totally agree. And maybe he did. Maybe there was something that we didn't see that the spotter saw. But that is why, at least in my opinion, we need to have some full transparency on events like this. And we've heard nothing from the league in the couple of days since this game happened. The league needs to be more transparent with this, because I can tell you, the Miami Dolphins landed back in Miami Sunday night, and they still didn't know why Teddy Bridgewater couldn't play in that game. I can tell you that. Now, obviously, the two other things that contribute to me thinking that the NFL might have overcorrected, or as one NFL executive told me, this was overreaction Sunday, is you saw the two roughing the passer calls. One of them Sunday afternoon, Grady Jarrett on Tom Brady, which no one other than Jerome Boger thought was roughing the passer. And then obviously on Sunday night in the game against between the Raiders and Kansas City, another roughing call on Chris Jones of Kansas City against Derek Carr. That certainly did not look like roughing the passer. But my whole thought is, Myles, and I'm sorry to have monopolized the time on this, but my whole thought is, I think that the NFL is really trying to do the right thing here. But I can't help but think that this mindset that has been set down by the league to be cautious with the quarterbacks and to be careful with the quarterbacks has just gone too far.
Well, it's interesting, because if that spotter did spot some sort of ataxia, then I agree with you that Teddy Bridgewater should absolutely be out of the game. And when it comes to concussions, I suppose that I don't have a problem with trying to overcorrect it in that way. And I know it's the same issue, but it really should be two separate ones. And I hope that the NFL really starts to understand that it should be two separate ones, because when you're talking about ataxia, yes, that is certainly one thing. But when you're trying to legislate basically defense out of the game, that can't be something that we do if we're still going to play football, unless we're going to have the quarterbacks wear flags. And if you get to the quarterback and you take off his flag, then that's got to be what it is. I mean, I give Max Crosby some credit too for early on in that game when he went up to Patrick Mahomes. All right, it was just basically a bear hug, and it was in the grasp. And at that point, Max Crosby said, look, I'm just going to stand here and I'm going to hold him like this, and I'm not going to let him go because I don't want any kind of roughing the passer penalty. And that's a good job, I suppose, by a defender. But at the same time, How is Patrick Mahomes then supposed to react to that? Is he not supposed to try and move so that he can get out of a sack? And if he does, then what's Max Crosby supposed to do? I don't think it's a good thing for defenders to have to somehow say, well, how do I have to bring this guy down? And what I thought was really great about Arthur Smith's reaction to that was he said, I just want to know how to coach our guys. When Grady Jarrett is basically doing the teach tape of twisting down and not slamming down. He's not trying to put his full body weight on Tom Brady. What exactly is he supposed to do his job that has gotten him paid for as many years as Grady Jarrett has been in the league? All right, this is something that he was doing what is on the teach tape, and then he somehow still gets flagged. And Chris Jones, I don't know what he did to an official, because he's got the Matt Ryan issue from a couple of weeks ago where he said whatever in the world that it was that he said that got him flagged for 15 yards. And then he comes in on Derek Carr, gets the ball, and then still tries to brace himself. And then he's told that he's landed on his full body weight on a passer who really is no longer a passer, because you got to have a football in some way, or at least throw a football to me to be a passer. And when, the defender is the guy that has the football, I don't really understand that. So the NFL, I think, has got to do something to make sure that roughing the passer calls are not getting out of control like this, because right now they are absolutely out of control. And I don't know what defenders are supposed to do to actually do their jobs.
Myles, I agree with everything you said, and just to illustrate that, I watch a lot of Red Zone on Sunday, and twice in games, it might have been more than two, but there were two that I saw of pass rushers who got in on quarterbacks, and I thought I was watching the Pro Bowl because they got in on quarterbacks and they enveloped them in a hug and did not take them to the ground. And quickly, the referee, so for those who don't know the positioning of where officials stand during the game, there are two officials that stand behind the quarterback at the snap of the ball on either side of the quarterback, separated by maybe 40 feet. And, on one side is the referee and the other side is the umpire, who theoretically has set the ball and then scurries back to watch, line play from there. And so it's almost like the pass rushers are saying, okay, Mr. Ref, I'm going to be gentle with the quarterback. Don't flag me.
Yes.
And I mean,
exactly.
Again, that's probably an overreaction. But Myles, I just have to tell you what I was thinking after I watched that Grady Jarrett play. And obviously on the heels of the Teddy Bridgewater, banishment from the game, when I'm sorry, he shouldn't have been banned from that game unless there's something that we didn't see. But I just kept thinking the NFL is really in danger of becoming flag football if this continues. Tony Dungy basically said you can't play tackle football when you're making calls like this. Right. And so I think this is a moment for the NFL. I'm not about to say that, it's some full-blown crisis, it's this, that, or that. But what I am saying is, and again, I realize this is going to be taking it about 5 steps too much. But how do you think the Miami Dolphins will feel on January 10th or whatever the day after the season ends if they finish 10-7 and they finish just out of the playoffs, if they're the 8th seed and the top 7 seeds make it? How do you think they're going to feel looking back on a season where, man, if we just got one more win? Well, what would have happened if Teddy Bridgewater played in that game against the Jets? I don't know if they would have won, but they would have had a pretty good chance to win. And you put in a third-string quarterback, and absolutely, unequivocally, there's just no way to watch what we have watched and to be able to say that the game has not been affected the last 2 weeks by this stuff. So, again, I think you and I are both in agreement.
Yeah.
Got to be careful. You have to exercise all sorts of caution here, but you also can't go too far the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if there was ataxia, get him out. And we agree on that. I know. But if there's not, then you're right. You don't want to overcorrect too much, even if we are being on the side of caution with brain trauma. And so the fact that Teddy Bridgewater is now in the concussion protocol and he's got to make sure he clears all aspects of that, I also kind of think that's good, because it just will show that, hey, he never really had a concussion if he continues to progress through that protocol and pass through with flying colors. Okay. But at the same time, if we are going to say that pass rushers have to exercise X amount of caution, how are they really supposed to do that in the heat of what is a really, really emotional game, right? And what are they supposed to do when the fundamentals of what it is that you're doing and the physics of what it is that you're doing cannot be stopped just because you're in the pocket and you are trying to do your job? All right, Chris Jones gets paid a lot of money to get after quarterbacks, from the interior. He is one of the best in the league at it. And he showed that he's one of the best in the league at it on Monday night. And then he got flagged really for doing his job. And I don't know if we need an eye in the sky or New York needs to get involved on some of these roughing the passer calls. But to me, there's got to be some solution that the NFL implements immediately, because you cannot have these games and the outcomes being affected like this. I mean, the officials literally took away a turnover from the Chiefs. That, to me, cannot happen on something like this. It can't.
Right. In talking to the former NFL VP of officiating on Sunday night, Dean Blandino, and he said, because I told him what I was thinking, and he said, hey, I thought of that too, are the officials being too overcautious because of the Tua situation? And I just think this is one of those weeks, and I'll be interested to see Thursday or Friday. I'm going to call a couple of people at the league, and I'm going to say, what was done this week? Anything? What happened this week? What did Walt Anderson in the officiating department do or say this week? So we'll see what happens. In part 2 of our podcast, we are going to discuss everything else about the NFL that has nothing to do with Tua and the tributaries of Tua, shall we say. But I want to start by just reviewing one thing from the Monday night game, and that is Josh McDaniels' decision in the Monday night game to go for 2, down 1 point with a little over 4 minutes to go. And they failed, obviously. We probably wouldn't be discussing it other than to say, man, what a great hero Josh McDaniels is. Had the guts to go for it. That's how they won this game. Usually, you know what, Miles? There's an old cliche. History is written by the winners. Mm-hmm. And so, in this case, you're going to look at Josh McDaniels' decision. And I must say that one of the things he said after the game was that we loved the play that we had on. It just simply didn't work. And they had teams now spend a good amount of time practicing. They're both, short yardage plays from the 2-yard line, which is where these plays come from. But in this particular case, it didn't work. What'd you think of the decision? What'd you think of the play call?
Yeah, I didn't mind the decision, actually, especially given what the circumstances were in the game. There were just over 4 minutes left. Las Vegas had all 3 timeouts. And so if you're at that point, you want to try to see if you can get ahead, because you kind of figure that the Chiefs can go down the field and maybe score anyway. And if you can prevent them from doing that with your 3 timeouts, then you're going to have a chance to get the ball back if you don't make it, right? So I didn't really have a problem with the decision there, and I didn't have a problem with the play call either based on the way that Josh Jacobs was playing. Josh Jacobs, by the way, he has been outstanding in the last 2 weeks, back-to-back weeks.
He's a monster.
Yeah, he's gone career high in rushing. So I liked what they did. It didn't work, but that's a place where sometimes you say process over results and you don't mind it. The process there to me was right, especially because, look, I think 45 times out of 50, if not 99 times out of 100, Davante Adams catches that ball along the right sideline and he taps his 2 toes, and then boom, the Raiders are in position for Daniel Carlson, who's a very accurate field goal kicker, to send that thing through the uprights, and then they win, and we're having a totally different discussion today. So I really didn't mind anything that the Raiders did there.
Here's the thing. When you've got a running back who's red hot and you've got a defense that has not been able to stop him with any consistency, and you choose that for your 2-point play, running at a place that you feel your scouting reports and watching tape says that we have ultimate confidence that the guy who's run 21 times for 154 yards is going to be able to make 2 yards, I absolutely don't mind the call. And sometimes the other team makes plays. Now, if we talk about the Raiders and what happened exactly as you discussed, that if, for instance, I love Daniel Carlson. If, for instance, the pass to Davante Adams, where, maybe he was 8 blades of grass from catching the ball inbounds, okay? And if he catches the ball inbounds, all right, in essence, Daniel Carlson would have tried then a 57-yard field goal. And, I have a lot of confidence that he was going to make the 57-yard field goal. And that's silly to think in this day and age. It's certainly not a gimme. But there are 4 or 5 kickers in football who I think anything inside of 60, I would put my money on them. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is one of those cases where, and I woke up to a bunch of Raider fans. I got 2 emails overnight, got to fire McDaniels, horrible call. It wasn't a horrible call. It just didn't work. And yeah. I don't mind the call. So I think we're both pretty much in agreement there.
Yeah, we are. And look, how much better should you feel if you're a Raiders fan than if you're a Broncos fan, man? I mean, my gosh, the Broncos are reeling, and they've got a better record than the Raiders right now. I don't think that'll be the case at the end of the season.
I don't either. Hey, let's focus on the New York Giants. And I have this feeling about the Giants. I talked to Xavier McKinney, who made the play, put his hands up, and he got Aaron Rodgers to throw the ball into his hands.
Mayfield.
And exactly, yeah, a lot of deflections. But one of the other things is, I talked to somebody with the Giants after the game before they got back on the plane from London to come back here, high-ranking member of the Giants. And I asked him, what really stood out to you about this game? And he goes, coaching. He said, first of all, the fact that Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator, likes blitzing safeties. If you're a safety and you want to be Troy Polamalu, you like playing for Wink Martindale because he likes to send his safeties. And here's the amazing factoid. Talking to Xavier McKinney, I asked him about the difference between this year and last year for him personally. And he goes, last year I was not asked one time to blitz. And that seems insane. It seems crazy that a guy who made his bones at Alabama at being a sideline to sideline, he played down in the box, he played rangy safety, and he blitzed, for Nick Saban at Alabama. Why wouldn't you take full advantage of what he can do? But anyway, he blitzed, he forced Aaron Rodgers to throw the ball early, and he batted the ball down. all traits of Wink Martindale. That's one element of coaching. The other element of coaching that I really like is the fact that Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, comes over from the Chiefs and is a disciple of Andy Reid, obviously. And you see all the imaginative stuff that the Giants have done on offense. They've run Saquon Barkley out of the Wildcat 7 times in the last 2 games. Now, some of that was by necessity because both quarterbacks were hurt for a while against Chicago a week and a half ago. But in this particular game, he did it because, as somebody from the Giants said, we decided this is kind of a cool weapon to have, to just direct snap it to Saquon Barkley and then just see what happens. Let him pick the hole that he likes. And so I just applaud the fact that they're coaching well, playing well. And as I said at the top, the Giants might not be a great team, but I can tell you 4-1 is no fluke, and I think they are legit, and they're going to contend to make the playoffs. I think the stat I saw after the game is that their next 5 foes did not make the playoffs last year. So that can be deceiving too. Baltimore, I think, could be really, really good, and they've got Baltimore this week. But give me your impressions of the Giants.
Well, you know what the Giants kind of remind me of right now are the 2017 Rams, and that's because I was very close to that team. That was the Rams, and they got a coach that could help them all basically ascend to what their potential was. Right. And I don't know that Daniel Jones is going to be as good as Jared Goff was, but he's playing really well right now. They're utilizing Daniel Jones' talents to the best of his ability. Right. Todd Gurley came off a really ugly looking season in 2016. And look at what Saquon Barkley's doing now. Right. There are just a lot of parallels, a lot of similarities. And Peter, reading your column, one of the things that stood out to me about McKinney was he said, we're having so much fun right now. And that's what football should be. Football should be fun, and when you're winning, obviously it's a lot more fun than when you're not. But that's kind of those things that they remind me of each other. And that's why I agree with you. I think the Giants are going to continue to contend. I don't know that they're as good as the Eagles or the Cowboys, but there are 7 teams now that make it. Right. There's 7 teams now that make it per conference. Why shouldn't the Giants be one of them? Why not? And this is a great start to the Daboll era, I think.
The one difference between the Giants and the early Rams teams is that the early Rams teams had the ability to be explosive on offense. This team really doesn't. But all the other parts of that, the coaching aspect, the fact that you might be playing with a slightly flawed quarterback, but there are some things he can do well, and a great running game, and a growing, burgeoning defense. All those things, I think, are interesting parallels. So we did talk about this a little bit last week. We talked about the troubles of the Rams and all that. And I don't want to overdo this, but I found myself thinking on Sunday, watching both the Rams and the Bengals. I said, there's a decent chance that neither of these teams are going to make the playoffs. And I think the Bengals probably have a better chance than the Rams. The one thing about the Rams right now is that it just looks like, as Sean McVay said after the game, they need some help. Matthew Stafford needs some help. I mean, that's to put it mildly. I think, and knowing the Rams a little bit, knowing people inside there, there's something that really I think is going to be very hard to fix during the season, and that is their offensive line.
Yep.
That's got to be a bottom 3 offensive line in the league right now. And Matthew Stafford, half the snaps, he's got to do everything himself. So that really bothers me from them. As far as the Bengals go, their lack of consistent explosiveness is really a factor. Going against 2 deep secondaries that everybody is playing now, where you have to win in the middle of the field in the short and intermediate areas. man, last year the Bengals just weren't like that last year. And unfortunately, that's what they are this year.
It totally is. And, we talked about Mike Kafka earlier, right? And the explosiveness that he's brought, the creativity that he's brought from that Chiefs offense. And you look at that play that the Bengals had on 4th and goal, and it's the one where you usually get that little backhand toss to the tight end coming around, and the Chiefs have done that so well, so well, so well. Everybody wants to be the Chiefs, but not everybody can be the Chiefs, right? So that to me is where you've got to really find things that work for you. And I can understand, it's a copycat league, right? Everybody tries to take what they can from one team and implement it themselves, but sometimes you don't know exactly what the coaching points are. And I think on a situation like that, that's where the difference is between, having the first people who teach it and then being the people to teach it off of the tape. I think that there really is a difference there. And the Bengals can be in trouble because they just can't be as explosive, as you said, Peter, with teams playing those two deep safeties. And when it comes to the Rams, I mean, their interior offensive line is in shambles. Rob Havenstein talked about it on Monday to reporters out there that they had a closed door players only meeting among the offensive line to just try to get themselves right. That's something great that Rob Havenstein's doing. He's a captain now. He's been with that team since before they moved to Los Angeles. He's one of 2 St. Louis Rams left, the other one being Aaron Donald. So if he's going to lead that group, then he's got to do things like that. But it's a talent problem, because they have guys out there basically that were on the practice squad and now they're starting at center. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to overcome. An offensive line has always got to be greater than the sum of its parts. But when the parts are basically 1 + 1 + 1 + 3 + 5 instead of 3 + 5 + 3 + 4 + 5, you know what I'm saying? It's going to make a huge difference. And, I'm not great at math, but to me, that's where the problem is coming from. And Matthew Stafford's been sacked the league high 21 times. That number's only going to go up. And I don't know how he's going to make it through the season if he keeps getting hit like this.
Matt Rhule gets fired in Carolina. As I said, it was only a matter of time. And I found myself thinking on Monday when the news came down, found myself thinking of the links to David Tepper that David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, went to hire Matt Rhule. In January of 2020, Rhule was on a family vacation with his wife and I think 3 children. And but David Tepper was determined to get to Matt Rhule and hopefully hire him. So he wanted to be there when Matt Rhule got back from vacation. So what did he do? He was camped out in Rhule's driveway. So when Rhule came back from vacation, he and Tepper sat in a room in Rhule's house in Waco, Texas, and basically got this deal done. Had a very long interview, and that's who they ended up hiring. The reason they did that at the time is that they wanted to keep him from interviewing with the New York Giants, and he was scheduled to interview the next day with the Giants. But the only reason I bring this up is that David Tepper was so desperate. Everybody said, well, why in the world do you sign a guy to 7-year, $62 million contract? Why would you do that? Because that's what he was going to make at Baylor. So why would Matt Rhule take a pay cut to go to the NFL? He wouldn't. Right. So Tepper had to give him that money. Well, now, obviously, Rhule, I think, is going to go back and coach. But Tepper, as of this morning, owes Matt Rhule about $40 million. And I think it is just a great illustration of the fact that, listen, coaching and having the right coach in place is one thing, and coaching matters. Mm-hmm. You know what else matters? Having a quarterback. And their quarterback position has been a disaster since Matt Rhule got there, and he just couldn't overcome it. So Matt Rhule is still a very good football coach, and I don't think he got enough support from Tepper in tough times over the last year especially, and he never had a quarterback.
Nah, Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Darnold, and then Baker Mayfield were the starting quarterbacks that Matt Rhule went into the season with. And especially Baker Mayfield, when you get that guy in July and not April, not May, not even June, and you're basically setting him up with 6 weeks to learn Ben McAdoo's offense. And again, Ben McAdoo is your offensive coordinator. That's also not necessarily the most well set up to succeed. Yes, yeah. Let's call it that. So yeah. I don't know that Matt Rhule was ever going to have that much success at the NFL level. I mean, sometimes this makes me think of one of my favorite sayings, which is sometimes things are outside the box because that's where they're supposed to be. And we'll see. Probably Matt Rhule go back to college, have a lot of success if that's what he wants to do. But I'm also reminded of that clip that was floating around on social media from a few weeks ago from Ed Orgeron, the former LSU coach, when he said, hey, they told me, hey, we're going to fire you, coach, but we owe you $17 million and we're going to give you all of it. And goes, yeah, all right, well, what time you want me to leave and what door do you want me out of, brother? You're going to give me $40 million to not coach the Carolina Panthers? What time you want me to leave and what door do you want me out of?
I think you and I both are kind of fascinated by Brandon Staley. I am interested, and I have supported many of his iffy decisions on fourth down, including 4th and 1 from his own 18 last year in the last game of the season against the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, it failed. But I had a problem with what he did on Sunday, and let's set the stage. The Chargers are ahead of Cleveland in Cleveland, 30-28. There's a minute 14 to go in the fourth quarter. He's got 4th and, as it turns out, 1.7 yards to go. So basically 4th and 2. It's called 4th and 1 on the NFL play-by-play, but it was a very long one. Next Gen Stats told me that it was 1.7. So 4th and almost 2 at the Chargers 46. So you had a couple of analytics models say go for it. Next Gen Stats said very narrowly you should punt the ball. This is where, at times, I believe that you need to ingest what the analytics tell you and then say, you know, I would rather force Jacoby Brissett with no timeouts left to start a drive from his 15-yard line and in a minute 5, let's say, or however much time, but let's say 65 seconds to have to go 55 or 60 yards to get in position for a makeable field goal. Yes. But they went for it. I'm really bothered by the fact that Justin Herbert went from the shotgun, which totally takes the run away. And you've got Austin Eckler, who's had the best rushing game of his career in the backfield, that you've got to respect. Maybe he might run. And they threw a slant pattern that a rookie jumped the route and it was incomplete. So now the Browns have a much better chance to win the game with a field goal. Turns out that their guy missed a field goal, so Brandon Staley did not get a tremendous amount of crap after the game, but he still got quite a bit of it. I just think you have to punt in that situation. Your thoughts?
Well, I think you don't necessarily have to punt, but if you're not going to punt, then you need a much better play call than what the Chargers put out there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I think that he should have punted. If it were me, I'm punting because I'm punting to a backup quarterback who is going to be backed up in his own territory, just as you were saying, Peter, and he doesn't have any timeouts to work with. And Jacoby Brissett has been in this kind of situation before throughout the course of the season. And really, the only time it's worked was in week 1 when Cade York hit a 57, 58-yard field goal to give the Browns the win over the Carolina Panthers. So that's the other thing that's in the back of my mind. We know that if we give the Browns a situation where they don't have to get that many yards, it's a makeable field goal for their kicker. And he's kicking at home. He should be comfortable in the environment. So it's all about risk assessment, right? It's different if you're punting it to Patrick Mahomes or trying to keep it away from Patrick Mahomes, right? Or Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or any number of quarterbacks that we could talk about. But with all due respect, it's Jacoby Brissett, right? we're not talking about the same level of QB, and we're not talking about the same level of the receiving core. So if you go for it like that and you don't make it, then you are giving them the opportunity to say, hey, complete one pass, make it a makeable field goal for your kicker. That's what they did. So I agree with you. I don't know why you go from shotgun. I don't know why you don't go from under center to at least freeze the linebackers. Browns have some of the worst linebackers in the league since Anthony Walker's been out. They can't stop a nosebleed. So I don't know why you're not running the ball in that situation anyway. I mean, you have to do something to give yourself a chance. And I get, 4th and 1, 4th and 2, whatever we want to call it, it's makeable, and you can win the game right there. But you can also really kind of lose it. And Brandon Staley's explanation after the game, they wanted to win the game, yes, but we trusted our defense, this and that. Well, your defense didn't get it done, frankly, because, again, it's a 54-yard field goal. That's makeable for Cade York, and he should have made it, especially because he was drafted in the 4th round. So they are lucky that they escaped Cleveland with a win. They are very, very lucky. Yeah.
Very lucky. Myles, we only got 1 minute to go, but I want to say 3 sentences apiece on Buffalo at Kansas City and Dallas, Philadelphia.
All right.
I'm just gonna say 2 things about Buffalo at Kansas City. I just have this feeling, especially because Gabe Davis has really emerged as not a good, but a great number 2 receiver. I just think that Buffalo's firepower in this game might be too much for Kansas City. Thoughts?
I think you might be right. But they've still got to play the game, and Kansas City, when motivated, can be as good as anybody. That's 3.
No question. Dallas at Philly interests me. Dallas has taken advantage of some pretty rickety offensive lines in the first month of the season.
Yes.
Now they go up against what might be the best offensive line in football. And so I just look at this as, let's say Cooper Rush has to play. I don't know who's going to play at quarterback. If Cooper Rush has to play, this is a game where he's going to need to make some plays. Okay,
yes.
He has been a complimentary piece so far. And on the other side, man, I think covering the 3 weapons that Jalen Hurts has, plus a really emerging running back in Miles Sanders. I kind of like Philadelphia in this game. I think their weapons are a little bit too much, and I like their ability to protect Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I like Philadelphia too. I'm going to break the 3-sentence rule. But I feel like Philadelphia right now is in a better spot. I mean, whether or not Dak Prescott plays, I like the way Philadelphia is playing. I like the way they're winning games, and I love the way Jalen Hurts is leading that team. So it's one of those games where Cooper Rush can't necessarily just be the game manager. They're going to need him to make a couple more plays if he's the one that's out there. And if Dak Prescott's playing, then he's still coming off an injury. So how is he going to be able to shake that rust off? So I like Philadelphia because of those factors, but both of these teams have shown an ability to really get after the passer, and so that could be the great equalizer.
Yeah, I agree with you. So my thanks to Myles Simmons for the breakdown of Week 5 and the look ahead to Week 6. My thanks to Brandon Graham for coming on and enlightening us about the art of the trash talk. But thanks so much for experiencing another episode of the Peter King Podcast. We'll be back next week. And one of these weeks, it's going to be boring in the National Football League. I'm not sure exactly when that is, but I will be in Kansas City for the Buffalo-Kansas City game. Nice. So hopefully I'll have a couple of insights for you next week. Thanks so much for your listenership, your viewership. And you can either hear us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, or obviously you can watch us on the NBC Sports YouTube page. Thanks a lot. We will see you next week.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.